Hello. So today, because this Shabbat we're not going to be doing anything that has to do with the Parsha, we'll talk just about Pesach. And I know that all of you are either currently in the midst of preparing for Pesach or enjoying the vacation during Pesach, or going to work on Pesach. Either way, you might be pressed for time. And so today we'll do a short idea, not about a midrash, about some halachot that have to do with Pesach. Specifically, the Rambam's position on eating matzah, and this connects to a broader issue about not only about matzah but in general about the mitzvot, and the question of how much intent and understanding do we have to have of the nature of these mitzvot that we do when we do them. So, in general, if a person does a mitzvah with no bracha, without saying the bracha, without saying the blessing before the mitzvah, say a person puts on tzitzit without having said the bracha for tzitzit, it's pretty clear that they're still mekayem the mitzvah. In other words, they fulfill their obligation. They simply didn't say the words that precede the obligation, which is part of the correct ritual, but still they've done the mitzvah. On the other hand, there's another issue which has to do with kavanah, with intent, and there's a big argument based on some unclarity in the Talmud as to, do you have to have the intent to do the mitzvah in order to get the benefits of the mitzvah, the spiritual benefits, to be chalked up that you've actually performed the mitzvah. Okay, so for example, if a person is Shomer Shabbos without having intended to be Shomer Shabbos, so has he performed the mitzvah of Shmirat Shabbos? Okay, there obviously this problem exists more with mitzvot between a man and God than between a man and his fellow man. Okay, between Adam and Chavero. But even there, you can maybe give tzedakah without paying attention or other things. One might, question, when you don't have the intent to do the mitzvah, did you actually do any mitzvah? And this is a discussion that exists, it's like a cross halachic question. Do mitzvot need kavanah? Haim mitzvot tzrichot kavanah? But there are approaches, specifically Rav Soloveitchik took this approach, following his grandfather, that say that maybe there's different need for kavanah in different mitzvahs. In other words, it's not sort of a across-the-board thing. Every mitzvah needs the same level of intent, but rather it depends on sort of which mitzvah it is that you're doing. Now, when it comes to intent, when I say we need intent to do the mitzvah, there probably are, let's say, 3 levels that we'll consider here. One of them is doing the action of the mitzvah. Okay, I intend, to do this action. Let's say a person intends to, pick up a lulav on Sukkot. So he picks up the lulav. Maybe he doesn't know that it's a mitzvah to pick up a lulav and to wave the lulav, but he intends to do what he's doing. He's not just doing it without paying attention that his hand is doing something he did not intend to do. Then there's another level, which is the intent to do a mitzvah. A person sees this item and knows that by doing the following action he will be performing a mitzvah, and he does it. He does it in order to fulfill his obligation. And a final level can be a person who not only knows what the action is, not only knows what that this is actually a positive thing, a religiously positive thing, but also understands the meaning of what it is that he's doing. Okay, so a person who maybe picks up a lulav doesn't have to know what he's doing. A person who's davening needs probably not to only know that he's davening, but know what it means, what the words that he's saying mean. He has to know what it is that he's davening for, and what's the content, what's the meaning of his action. Not just know that this action is favorable, that this action is a mitzvah. Okay, so there are 3 levels of kavanah, and in each mitzvah we need to sort of look and see what is required. Now, most people believe that when you say a mitzvah needs kavanah, you mean the middle level that I mentioned a moment ago, that you're not only aware of the action you're doing, but you're also aware that it is a mitzvah. Okay, that's sort of the meaning of the phrase mitzvot tzrichot kavanah. That mitzvahs need intent to do a mitzvah. You need to be aware that this is something that God told you to do, either that He told you to do or that the rabbis told you to do by extension. And that's the requirement, the basic requirement. If you take that, and I won't go into the other sources, but the Rambam definitely seems to believe both in the mitzvah of shofar, of blowing the shofar, and in the mitzvah of listening to the Megillah. In both places he clearly states that a person who heard the Megillah or heard a shofar, but wasn't and even he knew that he was listening to a shofar, but didn't intend to be yotze, and didn't intend for that to count for his hearing the shofar, that's not good enough. He must hear the shofar again with the intent of doing a mitzvah. So, sort of the second level of intent that I mentioned a moment ago. The Rambam, therefore, definitely says that. But surprisingly, when it comes to eating matzah on the first night of Pesach, so he says, Achal matzah belo kavanah, yatsa yedei chovato. Person who eats matzah without kavanah, that's enough. You can be yotze, you can be fulfilling your obligation of eating matzah, even when you ate matzah without the intent of eating matzah. Now, first of all, just so that we're clear about this, during Pesach, we don't have to eat matzah. We only have to eat matzah in the first night, in the Seder night. For those of us in America, we need to do this 2 times, right? For the first two Seders. That's an obligation. You have to eat the matzah. Then, everything after that, you don't have to eat any more matzah. So the Rambam is talking specifically about that first matzah that you eat in the first night. And he says explicitly, a person who eats without kavanah, he gives an example here, she'ansu goyim or listim, lechol, somebody force-fed him, okay, like the force-fed him matzah, that person, that's fine. He's yotze. By yotze, I mean he fulfills his obligation. Later on he says again, a person who was deranged during the time of his eating matzah, must eat again after he was healed from his derangement. As we know, a person who's deranged, who's what's called in halachic terminology a shote, a fool, is not obligated to do any of the mitzvahs. And so the Rambam says he needs to eat again if he did it when he was deranged, but not because he wasn't aware that he was doing a mitzvah, but because he was deranged. So he wasn't obligated at all to do the mitzvahs. So he didn't do a mitzvah, he didn't fulfill an obligation because he wasn't obligated at the time. But specifically, he doesn't say because a fool was not aware that it's a mitzvah, he can't be yotze. He can't fulfill the mitzvah. No, he just doesn't have the obligation to begin with. So both of these sources indicate clearly that the Rambam believes that a person does not have to have intent to be yotze, to do a mitzvah, when he eats matzah. And the question is why? Why, if in most halachot, if almost every halacha that we know, the Rambam requires intent, and it also makes sense, right? I mean, you're trying to make this a religious experience. Just being aware that you're performing some technical thing, eating a piece of unleavened bread, in what way is that significant religiously, right? I mean, why would that be meaningful? Why would that be sanctioned and acceptable as fulfilling the obligation of the mitzvah? We would assume by default that this middle level of intent is required as a baseline for every mitzvah. Why would the standard be lowered for Pesach? So, I think that the answer lies in the special nature of what we are trying to achieve at the Seder night. In the Seder night, we have a mitzvah to be mesaper b'yetziat Mitzrayim. We have a mitzvah to tell the story of Yetziat Mitzrayim, of leaving Egypt. Now, this is different from another mitzvah that we have, the mitzvah of Zechirat Yetziat Mitzrayim, of remembering the leaving of Egypt. That mitzvah we have to do every day. Every day when we read Shema, the third parsha of Shema, both talks about tzitzit, but also talks about leaving Egypt. And every day we need to remember that we left Egypt. But only on the Seder night do we need to tell the story about leaving Egypt. And on that night too, the Rambam says, and this is based on a Mishnah, I believe, or if not a Mishnah, a Gemara, that b'chol dor v'dor, in every generation, chayav adam le'arot atzmo ki'ilu hu yatsa mimitzrayim. A person must see himself and show himself as if he himself left Egypt. That's the purpose really of the Seder night, is not just to remember what happened, but to retell it. And the retelling is supposed to, in a sense, make us relive the experience, really fully experience it ourselves as individuals, trying to sort of recreate that atmosphere and live that and go through that process. That imagine what it would be like and really feel what the people of Israel felt when they left Egypt. We're transcending time and trying to get into that mode. And so we tell it, right? We tell the story. Just like whenever we tell the story to our children, we're passing along our tradition and thus keeping it alive for them to tell their children, and so on and so forth. In the same vein, the Rambam says the person has to really see himself as if he's lived through it. And so in that context, I think we can understand why the Rambam says that with matzah, you don't need intent. When a person left Egypt, why did they eat matzah? It's a complicated answer, but at least according to the verses, one reason why they ate matzah was because they had no time. They simply hadn't enough time to bake their bread. So without any other recourse, they simply went ahead and ate whatever they had. And so they didn't eat the matzah because they were commanded to, even though God did tell them this would happen. He predicted it would happen before, and they gave the mitzvahs of matzah in advance, but God also knew the future. In terms of the experience of why they ate as individuals, as people, why did they eat the matzah? Because that's what they had. They didn't have any special intentions. They didn't have any special, it wasn't like the Korban Pesach, like the sacrifice there. Like God told them, sacrifice a Korban Pesach, that's part of the ritual. Matzah they just had. That's what they had. That was their basic food. So they ate it. Basic sustenance. So the Rambam is saying, well, listen, if the purpose of the Seder night is to relive that experience, you need the same level of intent in this mitzvah as the Joe Schmo who was out there crossing the Red Sea. Okay? So if Ploni Almoni, if Joe Schmo had no intent whatsoever to do a mitzvah, and that's what he ate, that's what you need to do too. Not because we want, not because this is a lesser mitzvah or something, but because the meaning of this mitzvah is part of the meaning of the mitzvah is to relive the experience of those who left Egypt, and their experience was very simple, was very very sort of straightforward, and their experience with the matzah was not a religious one on the spot, but more just, this is what I have. And part of that reliving, therefore, is to accept that that's okay. You can also eat the matzah with great intentions, etc., etc. But all that we require of you, is to say, I just know that I'm doing the right action. Whether I have any kind of special meaning over here, that's secondary. The number one importance here is to relive the experience. And so, I think if you think about it in those terms, you can understand a lot of other halachot in the Seder, like why we lean to the left. Even today, when we don't, when we are not knowing that way, according to the Gemara, a person who leans to the left is a person doing it because that's sort of, the way of a person who is free. Indeed, if you're lying down on the floor, it makes a lot of sense to lean to the left onto some sort of a pillar or something for it to be comfortable. That's how they used to do it then. And so we're trying to recreate that atmosphere, to do what they used to do. And so live as free men did then, and bring that experience into our lives. Not to live as free people necessarily are today, even though that's an important aspect too. It's even more important than being free is being like those people, re-experiencing what they went through retelling, through actions, and so that's, and in that context, lack of kavana, lack of intent, can even be a blessing, because you just get into the role and just act it out. So, with that, I think we'll conclude today. Have a happy Pesach, and see you next week.